can save this world today. Come on and lift your voice. Did anybody come to praise God today? Put your hands up. Let's go.
Hello, and welcome to today's live discussion on the topic of racial injustice, dignity, and image. My name is Israel, and I've just finished my second year studying maths at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge. So very quickly, I'll run through the structure of today's event. We'll start off by introducing the panelists very quickly, and then I'll ask a general question, which each of the panelists will take no more than 2 minutes to answer. Then we'll move on to more specific questions directed at each of them. And at the end, we'll have a time for Q&A. And I believe the link to the Google form should be found in the video description below if you have any questions.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Hannah. Just to reiterate Israel's welcome, thank you for joining us. I'm not sure if you know, but today is actually Juneteenth, and that is a celebration of the emancipation of the African-American slaves in the States on June 19th, 1865. So we're just going to begin with our introduction of our panelists. The first person we're introducing is Carol. Carol recently completed her PhD at the University of Cambridge, studying biomedical sciences. She was born in the US, and having lived in between the UK, the US, and Nigeria, she desires to use her research to improve the status of science education within African countries, and set up her non-for-profit, the JR Biotech Foundation, to advance knowledge and technical skills in applied bioscience and STEM in Africa. She has also founded the renowned gospel choir.
Our next panelist is Shim Etukwe, also known as Eso. Now, just like me, he was born in Nigeria before moving to the UK as a child with his family. But very much unlike me, he's a successful Christian hip-hop artist and rapper. His first major album was So It Begins, which was released in 2011. And then the following year, he released his breakthrough album, So It Continues. And then in 2015, he released So It Ends. His latest album is Augustine's Legacy, in which he talks about what we leave behind and what we're remembered for. He's currently based in San Antonio, Texas.
Andre Saxman Brown is our third panelist, and he's a London-based gospel, funk, dance, and soul saxophonist who has played with many high-profile musicians, including Pharrell Williams, Timbaland, Craig David, Janelle Monáe, and Neil Diamond.
Our fourth panelist is Daryl Williamson. Daryl is the lead pastor of Living Faith Bible Fellowship, which is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational church in Tampa, Florida. He's also a leading voice within the American church at large. Other than his dad, his heroes include the American sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois, who I believe was also the first African-American to earn a doctorate from Harvard, and then also the clergyman Lemuel Haynes.
And our final panelist is Claude Atcho, who's a pastor at Fellow Memphis, a multi-ethnic church in Memphis, Tennessee, and previously an English professor in Boston, Massachusetts. Some of Claude's favorite authors include Ralph Ellison and Richard Wright.
Awesome. So now the very first general question, which each of our panelists will answer very briefly, is this. So what has been your experience, firsthand or otherwise, with racism and racial injustice in the UK or the US, as the case may be? Anyone can start. This might be on there.
I'll go ahead and jump in. My experience growing up in living in America in Seattle, in Boston, and now in Memphis, Tennessee. I've seen it everywhere that I've gone in the ways that neighborhoods are segregated, in the ways that different schools are funded, and then on a personal level, I have very vivid memories as a young kid at a daycare with my mother, being maybe second grade and making some friends. A white young boy and his sister, and them being really entertained by my jokes and my antics and everything that I was doing. And then the next day, them coming back and not speaking to me at all, and having to ask my mom what happened between yesterday and today. And I remember that as being one of the first instances where I understood how I was perceived based on my skin that God had made me in. And so I could tell many other stories, but those are some of my personal experiences.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would kind of echo that. Being an old school teacher in London, some of the microaggressions that you would face, even being a student, right? And some of the microaggressions you would face about how difficult it is to say your name, even though you could say Schwarzenegger like calmly and with gusto, and then going to Durham University and facing some of the things. People just kind of like, I remember walking on the street with my mom and my sister and a child, and even her mom just kind of staring at us and turning her head as we were walking past her at Durham, because she probably never seen Black people. And, even some of the interactions with some of my classmates, like not understanding how I was talking, some of the stuff I was trying to say, but not really wanted to learn, but just kind of be like, oh, it's just because you're Black, that's how you're talking. So in the UK, it's a lot of the microaggressions that are faced by Black and brown people over there. So it's never as overt, like overtly racist. Somewhat it's covert over there. They might call you half caste or something, call you those type of things. And yeah.
Okay, I'll jump in here. I have had a different experience to both Claude and Eso. I haven't experienced racial aggression in my 36 years, which has been a real blessing to me. And I feel like it's almost an unpopular opinion to mention that nowadays, saying that actually I've had great treatment through the churches that I was attending through the years. and I was actually home educated, so it was a little bit different for me. But then when I went to college and got into the workplace as a musician, I haven't come across that racial prejudice as much as some others have done. So I recognize lots of other people have done, but I've been fortunate enough not to have gone through that.
Okay, I'll jump in next. First of all, it's great to be here with you guys. I love this conversation. I think maybe one way to kind of look at it is to kind of look at it systemically and how we see it systemically emerge. And I think there's a great historic example here in the U.S., which really has always struck me. Is back in 1831, there was a slave rebellion that was led by Nat Turner. And that happened in Virginia. But after that rebellion, many states began to pass laws to shut Black people down, free and slave. And so, for example, in North Carolina, they passed a law that made it illegal for Black people to gather, and also made it illegal for Black people to lead or to speak at gatherings, slave or free. And so, for example, there was a free Black man in North Carolina by the name of John Chavis, who had a school. That was his livelihood. After that law was passed, which was passed because of white fear, it's one thing to deal with slaves, but it's another thing to respond to the fear of slave insurrection by wiping out all Black people and by shutting down all Black people. And so it was not intended to be harmful to all Black people, but out of fear, there was this law erected that ostensibly oppressed or really put down all Black people. In the case of John Chavis, he lost his livelihood. He had been doing well, and then he really fell into poverty and really died penniless. And so that's just kind of an example to me of how racism, even if it's unintended to be harmful, can become kind of like, law and systemic and oppress very broadly.
I agree. So I just wanted to comment as well that racism, mainly, I think from the systemic point of view, would be that which affects people of color, Black, brown alike, whether in the US or the United Kingdom. My story is a little bit different. I was born in the US, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Nigeria. So in Nigeria, everyone pretty much is Black. Those who are not Black are probably people who are investing, doing business, and probably even ruling the system, either directly or indirectly. And then we worship them like little gods. And so for us, it was a little bit different. When I realized that I was actually Black was when I came to the United States. So the story changed. And at that point, things were strange. It wasn't what I expected. At workplaces, you were treated a bit differently, but also there was a lot of culture shock. So for me personally, and when I started to experience this sort of systemic racism was when I went to Georgetown to do a master's degree, and then, started working in research, whether the NIH or the Naval Research Lab. I kind of realized that even simple questions about seeing a Black person wearing a lab coat, and people were assuming you're a janitor or assuming you're a cleaner. They're like, oh, hey, I'm like, no, I'm actually a biologist. Oh, really? For real? Like, are you, so you get those kind of questions that kind of make you wonder, why me? It's two of us or three of us here, but my question is always different. Even at the stores, whether it's in Manhattan, New York City, they see you in a store and they're like, oh, I have a question about this, it's not just me, I'm with somebody else, a colleague. So, that's when I started realizing that, wow, this is really serious. And then coming to the UK, having gone to Cambridge and also did a master's in Oxford. And that's when I also realized that the systems are actually almost intentionally designed to keep Black people, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think we have to be honest and be to a point where we have to be open about these experiences, because that's the only way we can solve the problem, is that these systems have been somehow designed to keep us at a certain level. So you're not expected to rise above a certain level in your career, whether it be music or, certain kinds of music. It depends on where you find yourself. But in the corporate world, this is what it is. And it mirrors across whether through the programs that they're not creating intentionally or something. So it's systemic and it goes really back down, far back, as we weren't even born at the time. But that's where my speaking up comes in for me is really addressing the systems and the people who are in charge of the systems to say, well, I think the system is against me, it's against people like me who might not even get here because right at the primary school level, from their neighborhoods to the secondary schools, they are impoverished, they're not getting the right funding they need, not the right resources and opportunities. So they can't come here. So it's not about let's attract Black people here. Who are you attracting? What are you looking at? You know, you might not really find them because you're not looking and providing them the resources that'll make them to get here. And so it's a real issue. And I think it's bigger than we can imagine, but I really pray that things will change from now on.
Thank you, Carol, for that answer. I'm actually going to start with you as our first panelist. So you touched a little bit on work and academics and the lack of representation, particularly within STEM fields. Can you touch a little bit more about your specific experience and perhaps the hurdles that you think are necessary to overcome in order to see more representation within these sectors?
Right. So yeah, I'm a plant biologist, but I've also done biomedical research before switching to plants, which is a bit strange. I had to convince a lot of people that I actually was genuine in my interest to be a plant biologist. However, I'm here. And by God's grace, I finished a PhD and doing a little bit of a postdoc at a time. It hasn't been an easy journey. It's taken me years to get here. And that's because I've been very persistent and very determined. And I feel like, not everyone has that level of confidence or even the level of courage to keep going because, when it comes to systemic racism, it's not often spoken. It's not written to say, don't come in here. It's not individual racism, which is an attack on somebody because of the color of their skin. What is, I'm not going to employ you because you're Black or brown. People don't do that these days. It's systems created to say, okay, well, now this is Cambridge University. We're happy to have you come here. But how many of you are here? I mean, at the undergraduate level, up until I think last year, and Mary, you probably know this more than I do, they had 91 Black people for the first time at 1 year, right? The undergraduate intake. And I think a total of 200 undergraduates, and it was all over the news. It was massive celebration. And I'm thinking, no, I don't, it's great improvement. However, I think I'm disappointed by the fact that we have 200 out of thousands of other people, and we think we've made great progress at this time, 2020. Okay, you see what I mean? Then when you come into the undergraduate level, and this is where it becomes a systemic problem, is you have people at the undergraduate level, 200, let's say, Black folks in here. How many of them will continue in Cambridge University for a postgraduate degree? Is their experience good enough? Are they welcomed? Are the systems designed to make them feel that they are part of the system while they are doing their undergraduate degree, to the point where they'll be happy to say, hey, I love this place, there's change, I want to do a postgraduate degree. No, most of the people I see is like, ooh, I cannot even wait to get out of here. And some people are like, okay, well, first year we'll manage through. Some people finish, some people don't also, because of the way the system has not taken into consideration that people's backgrounds, educational family backgrounds are different. And so you cannot use that one way to judge everyone and then say Black folks don't do as well as white folks. And the problem why some people don't is because of their going back to their background, the family, the schools they have gone to, the resources that they did not have. And so they did not have equal opportunities right from the very get-go. And so they're here. Let's say 200 undergraduate. Now at the postgraduate level, I'll start with a master's degree. How many Black people do you have here doing master's degrees? Okay, well, you have a lot more people, but then they're mainly from Africa. And so by the time you finish, you're asked to go back home and fix the nation because, quote and unquote, we don't support brain drain. Africans have to go back and fix the continent. And so there is no program designed to keep us here. And then you go a step higher. The higher you go up the ladder of academia, the fewer Black people you see. They start to drop off. By the time you get to a PhD level, how many? 10, 15, 20? Where are they? Mainly social sciences, maybe a couple in medicine, a couple in biology, and then mostly also from Africa. And then, by the time you're done, it's like, oh, brain drain, we need to send you all back home, go and fix the continent. And so looking at the postdoctoral level, which is the part where you can increase the chances of Black people being faculty members and being in academia, you really don't have a plan here for them. Okay, and so the way the system has been designed is, okay, you get your scholarships, you come here, do your PhD, and then get out. At a faculty level, even this university has only one Black professor, one Black faculty member. I don't even think he's a professor. I think he's a faculty member in the social sciences. And this is not good. And this is not a Cambridge problem, it's a global problem. It's also across many universities, whether in the United Kingdom and also across the US. And so I think the problem is deeper than we can, but I think from my point of view, it's offering solutions. And so what I have done so far, and I want us to speak up more, is to take this on a more solution, sort of practical point of view, to meet with our administrators, colleges, vice chancellors, and say, create a program that will allow more representation of Black students in Cambridge, not just at the undergraduate level, at the postgraduate level, at the postdoctoral research level, to create the opportunity to have at least more faculty members who are Black. I want to see a role model. I want to see a Black person who's a professor in Cambridge University to make me feel welcome, that actually people like us should be here. I don't want to be the only one here. You see what I mean? And it does not encourage people who are younger to say, okay, this is a place where I feel like I can be. So this is what is called systemic racism. Is the institution has been designed in such a way that even the rhetoric of brain drain for those people come from Africa and also other people are not having that opportunity to get to the level where they want to get to, and they should get to, because the resources and also the design of the system is not really permitting.
Yeah, completely understand that. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Esso, I believe your latest single is titled Head Wrap Diaries, and it's a love song, I believe, to your wife. But after watching the music video the other day, it seemed it was also more about a celebration of Black culture and Black femininity in particular. So I was wondering, what was your idea behind the song? And also, why do you think it's important to celebrate Black culture?
Yes. So briefly, Head Wrap Diaries, moms wear the gilets over their head. Being married to a Black woman, I've seen her wear her head wrap going out. But really what shifted for me is when I had my daughter, Sade Rose, and I started to, I apologies. Hello?
Hi, yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes, apologies. So it's just about, I think for me, when I had my child, when I had my daughter, I wanted her to be able to see herself in the music that I was making. So that was one of my first reasons behind creating that song and the visual that went behind it, but also wanted to educate people to see a different perspective of what Black women could look like, as opposed to what they normally see that's caricatured in hip hop videos or even in film, right? So I wanted to show a regal side of Black women so that I can be part of the solution as a hip hop artist and not add to the problem. And so I wanted to just make sure that everybody who was watching it or everybody who came across that video would be able to see like, raw, like Black women can look like this. And what they wear on their heads sometimes isn't something to be laughed at. It's actually part of their culture. It's actually something that's deep, something that's rich. And in terms of like adding to racial equality and even like that conversation there, I wanted to create something that people from other cultures could see and appreciate. People from other cultures could see and learn, right? So sometimes, I'm a visual learner. So I may not read a book. I may not read a big textbook like Pastor Darrell would, but I want to create music that will cause people to go and learn more, to go and look deeper into what those head wraps mean. And there's a rich history about head wraps in culture. So that's kind of like a brief synopsis of Head Wrap Diaries.
Amazing, thank you.
Okay, on to Andre. So you and your band primarily play the genres of funk, soul, jazz, and gospel. Wanted to make sure I got them right. Can you tell us a little bit about these genres, how they link to your faith, and perhaps how you think music can be used to fight systems of injustice now and in the future?
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, yeah, the band that you're referring to is the Roots of Jazz, and we've been playing our concert the night that we do has been visiting churches and venues up and down the country for the last 4.5 years or so. And we tell the story of Christianity, slavery, and jazz music, and how those stories of Christianity and slavery combine, particularly with relation to the States, and how the influences of the Negro spirituals and the churches brought about jazz music that we know today. And the event tells that story throughout the space of the evening, narrated, showing the story of the Bible and the history of slavery through the Bible, and the history of slavery in the States. So that's what the Roots of Jazz is about. In terms of fighting racism, I do want to question the term racism, actually, because I think the way that we fight it, a major way we fight it, is to stop talking about race as much and focusing on the human race. Because as a Christian, I believe that in the Bible it says we're created as one race, and the real division that we have is between male and female. And the modern ideas that have permeated society are to not actually believe or to follow the real divisions that we have in life, which are between men and women, and to try and dissolve those divisions, because we're made to be to complement each other, to be different but complementary. But then the issues of racism, actually, it's based on judging people and reducing people. Imagine there's 1,000 parts a person, reducing them just down to the color of their skin. And there's so much more to us as human beings. So notwithstanding the experiences that people have had, I think a major part of the issue is that we need to look beyond this and look at the other problems in society which are actually causing more problems for us. So it's a very unpopular opinion. I'm very aware of that. And I'm not looking to give all the answers here, but I'm trying to raise some questions and give my view on the understanding of what race actually is.
Thank you, Andre.
Thanks.
Interesting. Our final question, penultimate question for Daryl. So Christians often use this word sin, which to some is confusing and to some even threatening. But I was wondering, in light of this current climate in which people are super aware of racial injustice, how does that help us better understand the Christian notion of sin, and how does it relate to sin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have to confess that part of me wants to respond to Andre right now with what he said, which is I think a minority view, but it's not an uncommon view, and certainly feeling the gravity to respond to that. But I think your question is essential, and so let's just do some foundational things for ourselves. And so, what do we mean by sin? And so I think that we all kind of understand at some level the notion of doing wrong. And so I think that's certainly helpful. But I think a way to appreciate kind of the pervasiveness of the Christian notion of sin is to think of sin as that which corrupts all virtue. And so it is that thing that mars. And so if you think about like in a relationship, like say a marriage relationship, it gets marred or corrupted by selfishness. And so in that relationship, I elevate sinfully, I elevate myself above kind of the other person, and that mars the relationship. Suddenly we get into power struggles. I begin to pull things to my advantage, things like that. So sin mars everything. It's like dropping a little stain of ink on a beautiful white dress. It's marred. And so sin is that quality of human nature that we've all experienced. This is not a abstract philosophic kind of thing for us. We all instinctively and experientially know our own ability to mar what's good. And so that's what sin does. And we've seen sin, which expresses itself in multiple ways, emerge in society in the form of racism, as groups who ideally would come together and have some mutually beneficial relationships, one, perhaps the dominant culture begins to marginalize and suppress the interests of the other to the point perhaps of exploitation. And so that racism that emerges comes out of sin's ability, or our nature's ability, to disrupt and mar what should be a very helpful and mutually beneficial relationship. Now, the nature of kind of human progress is that we learn some things about kind of what we've done, and we stop doing some things, but there's still a legacy of that sin that continues on. So I think one way of thinking about systemic racism is that systemic racism is the inertia of intentional racism in the past, right? So we did all these crazy things. We enslaved, we colonized, and that just continues, right? And so this is like a basic law of our universe, right? That thing's just going to keep going unless we arrest it, unless we change it. These things don't auto change, right? They don't change fully by themselves. Now, we'll learn some things. We'll stop doing things we used to do. We won't enslave, we won't segregate. But those instincts, those attitudes remain and continue to re-implement those same vices, just in new ways. Now, I think before I run out of time, I think it's important as we think about this as being sin. How do we offer redress? What do we do to kind of confront this? And let me suggest two things. One, I think, is straightforward. And the other one, we don't always fully appreciate, or we lose commitment to that one. And so the thing that we understand, I think, instinctively, is that we need to somehow change the way we think. We educate, we inform, we do panel discussions like this to try to help people understand the issues. I think we talk with guys like Andre and help them to understand that there's still racial dynamics in society, whether we want them or not, right? So Andre's awareness doesn't play to other folks. And so for him, it's like a level playing field, but we have to live in a broader society, right? And so at any rate, so those things can kind of continue on, and we arrest them by trying to educate and inform. And that educating and inform should give rise to conviction. I see it, it bothers me, I don't like it, but here's where we've struggled. And this is the nature of sin and how sin becomes codified, is just trying to inform does not change the superstructure of a society, of institutions. And so we have to then intentionally, with our minds, with what we've learned, we have to then reconstruct societies, institutions, laws, relationships, in some cases, do things that we often call affirmative action to try to right that ship. And so we have to create a social environment, because that social environment is the thing that begins to impact the way people feel and think instinctively, right? And so by living in that new social context that we've kind of developed out of our conviction, we can kind of see that change, both in terms of racism and, frankly, with a whole variety of ways that sin gets codified, like Andre's point about men and women. I think those are things too that require structural change to try to change the balance. I'm not sure if I went longer than my time, but sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much. We actually still have a bit more time to spare. So since you wanted to respond to Andre, feel free to do so quickly if you want to. You're on mute.
I appreciate Andre's comment because it's hopeful and it's optimistic. Mm. And so Andre is right as a young man. He does not want to be burdened with the weight of racism. And so he's right to want to declare it gone. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to just decree that, right? We just can't say it. And so there's still significant racialized experiences that we have. Some of the things that we know about with regards to what we experience here in the US around police actions. But I think what SO was talking about is more interesting. And so, which is the need to culturally affirm the full weight and dignity of Black womanhood. And so I can take Andre right now to some digital, dating site, and we can look at the stats and see that Black women are less likely to be pursued or prompted by suitors. That's a statistical fact. And so I think this racialization and the social capital that exists of white and Black still exists in our society. And so that doesn't go away because we just want it to go away. And so I think that those things still need to be addressed.
Thank you very much.
Do we have time for me to respond shortly, or do you want to move on?
Go on, very quickly.
Very quickly, cool. So I know I don't have time to go into many stats here, but I do agree. Of course, there is still racism and racist people in the world, in society, but my disagreement is over how much that is actually holding us back and oppressing us. And my issue is, to make the point as short as possible, I was all for campaigning against this stuff in 2016. I was like, man, this is awful. The police brutality is just terrible. Like, everything's going wrong. And then I started to look into the numbers, and I was frustrated because the evidence didn't seem to bear up to what I wanted to see. And like 13% of people in the States are Black, but then there's a higher percentage of people that are actually killed by percentages. But then you've got to look at who the people are actually committing the crimes. And then when you compare it to the crimes, the numbers actually work out. So you go, oh, maybe. And actually, when there's various surveys being done, which I've read loads on, but I can't go into all of it now. But basically, when you go on and look online, this is frustrating to me. I've actually got things where I just disliked it and wrote stuff. I was like, this is awful. But as I stopped to be led by my feelings and started thinking, I guess I have to actually look at the facts, I saw stuff and I was like, oh, maybe actually the police are less likely to shoot a Black man, which shocked me, and which it made me have to start rethinking what I believed. And to wrap it up as quick as possible, I think the main issue that we have, especially as Black people in society, is fatherlessness. And the breakdown society you talked about, I thought was fantastic. The point you made about society and working and building society, I thought that was a great point. I believe the answer to that is to work on the family, to work on marriage, and to affirm marriage. And that's the best place for men and women to be raised in the home, so that women can look up to strong examples of strong men and strong women, and a man loving a woman, his wife, wonderfully. That is one of the best things, most affirming things we can do. So I'm all here for the family, really. That's my 2 pence. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Andre. You touched a little bit about society, and I want to bring the next question to Claude. If you could talk us through the law of Christ, love your neighbor, and how you think we can apply this to the way that we live our lives and the way that we tackle injustice within society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important part of the discussion, and I think it's really important for people to think about this question so that they can see how Christianity speaks directly by its very nature to the questions of injustice and racial injustice. So, one way to think about this is Jesus's encounter in the Gospel of Luke. It's Luke chapter 10. I would encourage you, maybe you've never read the Bible before, it's be a great place to start. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus essentially boils down all of the scripture to really this key idea that encapsulates all of the commands in the Bible. And he says it like this. He says that all of the Bible boils down to loving the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And this is really critical. In the mind of Jesus, there is an inseparable moral logic to loving God and loving our neighbor, loving the other human beings, the other people made in God's image all around us. And so this is really critical. This shows us that in the logic of Jesus, in the moral framework of Christianity, at its very essence, love for God is not simply demonstrated by church activities, but it's actually demonstrated in how we love all people who are made in the image of God. And this, which all people are made in the image of God, if that's not clear, this really significantly impacts how we think about justice and how we think about doing justice. Biblically speaking, justice is a really broad and robust idea. We actually, if we have a true and thorough biblical Christianity, we will find we have just a fullness of resources to pursue justice in this world. Justice in the biblical framework is equitable treatment based on everyone being made in the image of God. It's the righting of wrongs, and it's the uplift of those who are marginalized. And what you see in the scriptures is that all of these things around the idea of justice, these are things rooted in the very essence and character of God, who himself is just, who himself is compassionate, who himself is righteous. And so in the mind of Jesus, according to the logic of Christianity, to love God is to then put his character into practice, which means loving our neighbor in the same way we would love ourselves. Now, of course, it's actually human nature to try to get out of such a radical call to love. In fact, when Jesus teaches this, the people who are hearing, they question him and they ask, well, who's my neighbor? They want to get out of this. And human nature, as Pastor Darrell was talking about sin, human nature is so marred, it's so turned inward that we're always trying to do the very bare minimum of love and righteousness, insofar as it doesn't cost us too much. But again, a thoroughly biblical Christianity will not allow for this. And so when the hearers ask Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? Jesus really drives the point home in a radical way. And he tells the parable of what we know as the Good Samaritan. That a person was on the road, they were assaulted by robbers, and a priest goes by and sees this person laying there dying and won't come to them. Another religious leader won't come to them. And it's actually a Samaritan who comes and crosses the road, helps this person, spends their money to care for them. And the background of this is that the Samaritan is actually crossing racial and ethnic lines to help somebody who would have been the other, someone who would have hated them, someone with whom they would have had historic racial animosity. And that whole pattern shows us that loving our neighbor flows out of loving God. And it requires us, it compels us, it drives us to a radical love, to a radical caring for the other, to allowing the burdens of what other people are dealing with to become our burdens, and to carry them forward in love and justice, because this is who God is. And ultimately, I'll just say this in brief, this pattern of loving our neighbor with this radical self-giving, it's really the pattern of the gospel, the Christian gospel, that Jesus himself has modeled this for us, that he burdened himself with our sins to restore us to God in the ultimate display of love. And so the call to love God and to love neighbor is modeled by Jesus. And as that hits our hearts, it compels us to go forward and to do the same. And this is what's essential to the nature of Christianity, if we would reflect and take the fullness of what the scriptures teach.
Great. Thank you so much, Claude. And thank you to our panelists for our first initial questions. We're now going to move on to the Q&A portion of this live. And Claude talked a little bit about perception, well, Christ in the New Testament, and how all of the commandments can sort of be boiled down to the love your neighbor. This question is directed at you, actually, Esso. You wrote a song called White Jesus. And I guess this sort of talks about concepts of Jesus within modern society. What is the reason you wrote this song? And can you share a little bit about the sentiments behind it?
It's kind of what you were saying. And, you know, I think firstly, when I wrote that song, I didn't know that people were going to like call me all sorts of names when I, in the initial writing of it. But ultimately the song is about how we as Westernized Christians have reinterpreted Jesus to look white, blue eyes, blonde hair. But in actuality, if you look at antiquity, if you look at where Jesus came from, where he lived, who he was hanging around, there is no way that he could be white. Now, somebody's probably saying, of course, everyone knows that Jesus wasn't white. But the fact of the matter is, not everyone knows that truth. To the point where I was having conversations with people before I wrote the song, with Christians who were telling me that their faith, their identity, they couldn't become Christians because they couldn't identify with the central person of Christianity. Not only was I having personal conversations, but I was also dealing with people on the street level, i.e. Hebrew Israelites, who always promulgate and say church people, specifically black church folk, like, why are you worshiping this white God, this white savior? Don't you see what white people are doing? And so as I'm writing this song, I'm realizing that, hold on, there is something that the Christians call a stumbling block of faith. And perhaps the image of white Jesus is that for some people. Not only is it a stumbling block for some black people, but it's also a reassurance of power to some white people. So how can I maintain my power over you? Well, I just have to show you and remind you that your savior is white. So therefore, if he's white, I'm white, therefore I'm God too. And so there was kind of like those conversations in having it. And lastly, I would say that as a believer, I should care about any misrepresentation of Jesus, right? So if somebody comes today and says, Jesus said, I am a way, a truth, a life, and everybody can come to God through different means, I would say, nah, he never said that. Of course, he didn't say that. So in the same way that I would be upset at somebody who misquotes Jesus, I should also be upset at some people who misrepresent Jesus, right? Specifically how he looks. And that says a lot to us, to people, when we export that image of Christ to African continents, when we export that image of Christ to other places of the world, African countries, people aren't able to see themselves within their faith that they want to follow. So it's kind of like the brief reasoning behind why I wrote that song.
Great, thank you.
Amazing. We have another question here, which is not to any particular person. And the question is, do you think more energy should be put into institutional change or educating individuals?
When they say institutional change, educating individuals, they talking about education on race?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay, cool. So there's a balance to be had. I think we need to make sure that we're not keeping ourselves in the past and creating a victim mentality so that everybody feels like things haven't progressed. I've heard people say things haven't changed, and they clearly have. A lot of work has been done by wonderful men and women to change things over many years. And of course, there are still progressions that need to be made. There's still concepts, like Esso was saying there, people thinking of a white Jesus and realizing actually Jesus almost definitely was anything but white. And if that was a stumbling block to somebody, then hopefully that's helped change perceptions and change minds. And education should be a wide education. We want to look at all the different people that are in a society, but we have an issue where we can end up with feeling like we can only learn from somebody who looks like us, or we can only read books from somebody who looks like us. I want to teach my boys that they can look at something and see it for its own merit, if it's good or if it's bad, see if it makes a logical, good argument, if the moral argument is correct. And I think we can get into a dangerous situation when, in our good effort to promote black culture and black artists and musicians, we don't want to give artificial praise or set up a situation where people are saying they're good when actually they're not coming up to the standard. We want to have one standard that everybody's been judged on equally. And obviously it's where sin comes in, where people go, actually, they may have a prejudice and not judge somebody equally. But we're not asking for things to be done better. We're looking for equality. And when I'm teaching my boys, I'm not really teaching them about, of course, I love that you said Augustine's, is it Chronicles, the name of your last album? So that he's a black theologian, and that's fantastic. But I'm not only going to look at the black theologians. I'll look at Spurgeon, I'll look at Calvin, I'll look at all these different people, regardless of color, because I'm looking at the truth that they're preaching, or what I believe to be the truth, which is teaching the word of God.
Can I just dive in there as well and just say that
yeah, go for
it. There is a reason why, because I used to teach religious studies in the UK. And when we would teach, our Black History Month in London, in the UK, is October. And when we would teach about Black history, we'd always teach about American Black history. So I'll learn about Martin Luther King. I might even learn a little bit about Malcolm X. But I would never be encouraged to teach about British Black history, you know what I mean? And the British role in slavery, and how up until 2015, 2016, you know, the British taxpayer was still paying slave reparations to people who own slaves. Like, that's just not something that's taught. So there's a reason, I'm saying it to say this, there's a reason why these things are not taught in school, because it causes people to confront their own sin, like to confront their own issues. It's something different. Like, it was over there, it happened over there. That's an American problem. That's, you know, that's not our issue. But once you start to realize that, right, like the British have had a deep rooted history in colonialism, in slavery, that's still happening now. It's not something that's past, like it's just gone. Like the British are still getting money from Nigeria. The British are still getting money from countries in the continent where, although we are free, like, you know, we're celebrating independence, we're not really independent if we're still paying like people money. Like the French are still getting money today from Congo, to the point where like the Congolese people cannot even make trade deals by themselves without first going to the French and say, hey, what you think? Can we do this? Can we not do this? And so this idea of stuff being like, we need to be teaching the full history so that we can have a full perspective of who we are and why we're here. So it's not like, hey, the Black people are just angry for no reason. No, we're angry, not we, but generally speaking, because history just hasn't been taught on the level playing field. Like, we haven't taught full history. We've just taught some parts. Like, we've taught Wilberforce did this by himself. We're taught like abolitionists by themselves. No, like there's a long history of stuff that just isn't taught. So when both Black kids, brown kids, white kids, when every child is learning about these historical truths, we're able to say, oh, now we know why such and such is this way. Now we know why there's institutionalized racism. Now we know why that kid can't get into that class. Now we know why this and that is happening. So I would say that's educational level. Yes, absolutely. Everything needs to be taught, not just parts that make the British or Americans look good.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think just to clarify a bit, I think the person was asking like which is better to invest energy in rather than institutional change or personal individual education. So if anyone has anything more to add to that.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much, SO and Pastor Darrell and everyone who's spoken. It's very enlightening. First of all, yes, we do need a lot of energy to change things. You can't change things by keeping quiet. It's kind of like a part of the British culture is saying nothing because we got to be polite. And then things are happening and people are suffering because we're saying nothing. I think it's time that, we're saying stuff and we're doing stuff, not just saying, but also doing. So yes, I kind of see Andre's point, even though I don't quite understand it. The fact that people are not aware of racism and racial injustice and how it's affecting real lives does not mean that it doesn't exist. It means that maybe some people are quite ignorant about the fact that it exists. Some people just don't want to hear about it, just like now with the whole George Floyd stuff and movement. There are people who are upset that people are campaigning. There are people who are upset that systems are being challenged and being shaken up. But that's the kind of level of shaking up that we need. I'm not saying break statues. I'm saying take them to the museums. That's where they need. I don't like the devil. I don't want to see his statue every morning to remind me that the devil is alive. You know what I mean? That he's real. No, I don't need that. Send him away. But I know in my mind that he is somewhere acting. I don't also need a statue of Jesus in front of me to know that Jesus exists. I have him in my heart. And so that's why we don't need the statues of slave traders, because I see it's one of the questions. Sorry, I'm jumping right into that one. We don't need a statue of slave traders parading people who have done a lot of evil to humanity, whether it's true the transatlantic slave trade. I went to Africa last year, to Benin Republic, one of the ports of slavery. I went that walk where the slaves, our people, were taken. I'll get emotional now. And for the first time, like I said, I grew up in Nigeria. We're not being taught this in history. We're not even being taught about slave trade. We don't even know much about that stuff. I kind of started to wonder, why are some Americans Black and why are some white? It's when I came to the US that I realized actually that these people, their fathers 400 years ago, for 400 years, were enslaved and taken by even the African chiefs who were giving guns and mirrors and some little pennies and stuff to sell their people. Now, let me tell you, people might fight them, but let me tell you, that is still going on. I'm a researcher. We get funding to do research in Africa. African governments are not contributing to research in Africa, mostly. The money still comes from American governments, from the UK governments, from the philanthropists here. And what they do is that they give you money and they tell you, actually, they identify the problem for you that you need to work on. And then they tell you exactly how you need to do it and with whom. And so the fact that you're solving African problems, being the African person at the forefront, usually we're behind it anyway. But if you manage to be somewhere around there, you're not being the one really addressing the problem that you're so passionate about addressing. And this is also part of that systemic racism. It's an issue that goes deeper than individuals. It's not name calling. I don't see a lot of people telling people, I'm not going to employ you because you're Black. I don't think that happens that much anymore. It's the systems that we're talking about. So just right into educational approach. Yes, we need a lot of energy. Number one, before we can address it, we must acknowledge that it exists, okay? We can't live in denial. I want it to go away. I want it to disappear. I have a son who goes to school. And there are about 7 Black, brown people in the school. Even from the age of 5, all the kids were calling him, he was bald-headed because of his hair. They were calling him all kinds of, at the age of 5, who teaches kids how to say that? And so we need that education at every level, not just the primary school, not on just an individual level. We need the governments to look at policies, educational policies incorporated in the schools at every level. We need the universities, the governments, and other organizations to review their policies. I know now there's a equality and diversity policy. Most times, who creates the policies? It's the same people who quite don't understand our experiences that still create the policies. So what we want to do is we want to be represented at the table where these policies are designed, where they are incorporated. And thirdly, I would say that education is key, of course. If you haven't felt a pain of something, you cannot understand it. And so I don't quite blame people who don't understand racism because they haven't faced it or experienced it. It's just like a woman giving birth to a child and the man is saying, yeah, I feel the pain. Yes, you do feel the pain. You faint in the labor room, but you can't understand the pain of childbirth. And for me, myself, having given birth 2 times, I can't even feel the pain that I felt during labor because that time is gone. And so what I'm trying to say is we have to respect the opinion of people, but we also have to respect the fact that people are dying from the fact that we're not speaking up and that we're not changing systems. So yes, we need more energy and we need to invigorate every system and incorporate the right policies to make sure that systemic racism is uprooted right from the very root. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've got another question.
Oh, so okay, go.
Yeah, no, let's move on to another question quickly. I think this one would be for Pastor Darrell. So the question is, what about how the church is embroiled in racism? How can you believe in a faith which has done so much wrong?
I think it's a fantastic, honest, and important question. I think that is essential. So I think there are 2 reasons why I'm not spiritually discouraged about the fact that the church is very much kind of embattled around race in general, and racism that exists in the history of the church in particular could be very discouraging to Christians. But two reasons why for me I'm not discouraged. One is that the Bible is a very realistic book, and so the Bible does not paint a rosy picture of the church. It paints a very realistic picture of a church full of problems and issues and people in those churches that are doing all kinds of things that Jesus does not want them to do. And so the Bible shows us a church that has tension and conflict, but it also shows us how to speak redemptively or to that conflict in a way that heals and restores, and when necessary, to remove elements in the church that's causing conflict to get them out. So that encourages me that God does not give us a picture of the church that's so rosy that I would look at the church today and find something that doesn't make sense. Okay. I think the other thing that encourages me is I know despite all of the the well-known and public tension in history around race in the church is that there are so many Christians who have devoted their lives to living out the kind of love that Pastor Claude talked about, who built their whole ministries and who have sacrificed themselves greatly for those who are marginalized, and in particular, Black and brown people in the US who have suffered at either personal, intentional racism or systemic racism. Their presence, their sacrifice reminds me of what we believe as Christians, that God's very spirit is present. Now, when we see that kind of racial kind of tension in the church, we call it out, we speak to it, but I'm thankful, as much as that's a problem in the church, it does not equal the sum of what the church has done and continues to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to our panelists. So we're just going to end on this quote. No repentance without confession, and no confession without truth. And we just wanted to get some really, really brief thoughts from each of our panelists about the importance of repentance and confession when it comes to issues of race and racial inequality. Anyone can jump in.
I'll take lead then. So basically, I think there needs to be repentance from somebody who's committed a sin, repenting towards somebody who they've sinned against. That's what the Bible talks about. In fact, it says if you're upset with your neighbor because they've sinned against you, you should hopefully meet halfway, as that person is coming to apologize to you, and you're going to seek reconciliation with them. So you should be literally both on the same lines. Ideally, one might get to the other before. You know, you might get the guy who wants to repent comes to the other first, or vice versa. But it needs to be from a specific person to a person. The idea of just general white guilt, just anybody apologizing for things they haven't done, is problematic, I believe. I'll leave it to someone else to take the floor.
Claude, do you have perhaps a response to that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, we live in a society. We have a communal life together. And because we have a communal life and we want to move forward, I'm speaking as American. We have a communal life forward. It's very clear that we have not dealt as a communal society with our history of racism and even slavery. And so we need leadership in our country that can help us help guide our country to what Jemar Tisby's quote is talking about, in the sense of an acknowledgement, an honest acknowledgement of our history, the bad, the portions that are good, so that together we can move forward with a common life. And I think that's really critical. And that requires some of what I think is happening in this moment over these last couple of months, at least in America, that people are becoming aware. And out of that awareness, as Pastor Darrell mentioned, there's a conviction, there's a sense of things that have been wrong, and we need to speak about those so that we can make the way forward. And so I think there is definitely interpersonal application, but I think we live in a communal life together. And so we need honest conversations so that we can move forward together, honestly, setting right wrongs and moving forward in a way that honors God and honors all people.
Great, thank you, Claude. We're just gonna wrap up, I believe. Anyone has any last thoughts that they want to share with our audience?
I just thought I would say repentance is important. And I think, you know, as children of God, we should see ourselves as one. I was reading the scripture about where Paul talked about the Jews and the Gentiles, and the fact that the blessings of the Lord is the same for everyone. And, you know, it was never God's intention, even to the time of creation. He created us all differently because, you know, we all bring something to the table, but he did not say, okay, then use however you feel yourself to suppress or oppress others. And so I think we need to come together as a body of Christ to, as we are denouncing racism and all forms of injustice and discrimination going not just racism, but it's quite a lot. But we need to openly speak about them, allow people the opportunity to express how they feel, and try to find reconciliation within communities, and bringing people together to march on. On the corporate level, we need to also address that prayerfully. I think prayer works. I am a prayer person. I believe in the power of prayer. And I feel like some things might not necessarily change by the fist, but when you go on your knees, maybe then we can start to see change. So I would encourage people to, as much as we speak up, we also pray about situations like this, that God will help us to move in the right direction and also cause change to happen at every level as we need them.
If I can just add very quickly, I just want to just say something to Israel, to you, and to Mary Hannah. I'm really encouraged by what you guys are doing. I think what your organization is doing overall. But I just want to say to the two of you, man, just keep at it, endure. We need you. As you think about your studies, think about how what you are majoring in, how you're going to use your education going forward in your career. You're only going to be at Cambridge for a little while. You're a transient at Cambridge, but give thought to the long arc of your life, your life's work, what Du Bois would call thinking of how your life work is going to affect and move the needle on this issue. And I'm grateful to see what you guys are doing, praying for you, and just want to just encourage you to just stay the course.
Yeah, great stuff.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our speakers, all our panelists. It's been a pleasure to have you on this live discussion. I also want to thank all our viewers for tuning in. I do hope that this is not the end, but the start of a conversation which will hopefully result in fruitfulness and change. I also want to thank those who were working behind the scenes to put this all together. Iona, who organized this event and invited all the speakers. I want to thank the tech people who put together this live stream, Richard and Alex. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Without you guys, this would not have been possible. So thank you.
Yes, I also want to just reiterate Israel's thanks. Thank you so much to our panelists for being a part of this. We really appreciated your diverse sort of thoughts and views. Our viewers, thank you so much for joining in with us today. And this is not the end of the discussion, it's just the beginning. And somewhere on this screen or in the description box below, you'll be able to see a Google form where you'll actually be able to contact some of our speakers if you have any further questions concerning race, religion, Christianity, anything within this sector. But thank you again for listening. Have a blessed day.